Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed on a special Monday night as free agency tips-off edition. I'm Roast Maxwell and I'm joined by the real star of the show, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing tonight?
Maxwell, couldn't think of a better time to talk about draft recap in the midst of all the free agency frenzy. Shams promised, and so far he's holding true to his word that free agency is crazy. But yeah, it's just a weird time because we're still basketball fans, right? But we're a draft-focused show, and so we wanted to, before we kind of wrap things up for this draft cycle for Draft Sickos, we wanted to give our thoughts on what happened on draft night.
Yeah, so we're going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to do your standard draft grades. We're the sickos. We like to get deep in the weeds and talk about some odd stuff, and that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to do a tiered list of the most interesting draft picks in the 2025 NBA draft. We're going to go, much like we did last week on our My Guys episode, by category or by like draft range. So we're going to do picks 1 through 10, 11 through 20, 21 through 30, and then, of course, the first half of the second round, back half, and the most interesting undrafted free agents as well. Leading it off, I want to talk about the Collin Murray-Boyles pick to the Toronto Raptors. Explain. No,
yes.
but seriously, so I love Collin Murray-Boyles. I think he's fantastic.
Same.
I believe he was a top 8 prospect on my board. He was in one of my top tiers. Murray-Boyles scored 16.8 points per game, 8.3 rebounds per game, 2.4 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.3 blocks, 62.2% on his twos. Just an incredibly powerful player around the basket, an exceptionally smart player, a versatile defender. And if you're just tuning in and you're listening to all these things and you're going, wow, this guy sounds awesome. He is awesome. The one scenario I do not like this necessarily is with the Toronto Raptors. This is a team that really, really, really lacks shooting. They have a lot of guys that take a lot of twos. And I think Collin Murray-Boyles does have a chance to evolve into a shooter. Not like I don't think he'll have like the Grant Williams outlier shooter trajectory, but I think he can be a guy who knocks one down here and there. But early in his career, he's going to make his mark inside the arc. That was a good rhyme. And I think that he's going to be able to play in Toronto immediately. Like, I think the physical tools, the feel, he's kind of just going to take Jonathan Mobo's role, would be my guess. Is it like he's just going to be sort of a more stout, powerful version of him, but a little less bouncy? So we know that the Raptors know how to utilize this type of player. Where I am confused is did you really need more of that on this roster? And also, Masai Ujiri was like removed from his job the next day, and I need to know what was going on there. Like, was he making the picks? Was the new guy making the picks? Like, how is this working out? So everything about this is perplexing to me. I'm fascinated with it from a team building perspective. Maybe this is hey, this thing's not working out. He's got the highest star upside. Let's grab this guy thing. What did you make of the CMB selection?
I loved everything that you laid out as to why this was interesting. Maxwell, you want to know what makes this interesting to me? Is that everyone is going to bring up a different player as to like the most shocking pick within the first round. But all the intel that we got, we kind of, for No Ceilings, we got off to a really hot start. We had the first 7 of 8 picks correct. But 9, like the selection of Collin Murray-Boyles at 9, I think really is what caused the boards to crumble. I think this is where everybody's boards really just started going out the window in terms of like who we thought was going to go where. As a basketball fit, I like it because this allows another quick decision maker, a guy who can at least dribble and pass. Maybe he can grow into like a Derrick Jones Jr. type shooter, like career trajectory, where it's going to take a little bit longer, to come along. But the defense is there. We know that Toronto needs defense within the front court. A lot of us feel like that should have been at the 5. Maybe CMB gives you some small ball 5 looks, but I'm okay with it coming from the 4 as well. I mean, he showed that he could guard up and down the lineup with his time at South Carolina. The decision-making is there. He just has such innate feel for the game, and I've mentioned this all throughout the season, and I want to keep driving it home, is that we forget that he's freshman aged. Even though he's been, 2 years at college, I like the fact that his ceiling should be looked at just as high as like a Derek Queen, who I am very high on as well, because they're about the same age, but CMB gives you that bonus year of experience within college. So I think it's interesting in the fact that, like you laid out, the team construct should have dictated that they've gone a different way, but I like the talent. You had him higher than me, even though I liked him. I had him 11th on my board. So this is the range that I felt like he should go. And I think he's a smart basketball player. And sometimes we get too cute thinking that you have to fix your basketball team in the draft. Sometimes you just go and get the talent, and then the next week address your needs in free agency.
Yeah, I'm just so fascinated by how this is going to play out both short and long term, because
Right.
I there is a real argument to be made that he had like the best star upside if any player on your board. And like we always preach, like if your team stinks, try to star hunt. Like I'm okay missing on a guy if I thought the ceiling was high instead of going safe. And that's what the Raptors did here. And it's like tough because it's like I don't want to begrudge him for it. I just really don't know. It feels like they're doubling down on an archetype that is becoming like a little dated with like these like handlers that don't shoot. Like there's just so many of them. Or guys that really just like don't play both sides of the ball is like their other issue on this team. But I'm really intrigued by it. I thought it was one of the most interesting selections because you can make an argument that it's bad and that like developmentally there's just not going to be the things he needs early on. And I think you could make the exact opposite argument, which is like, hey, he's going to have to get comfortable spacing to three. He's going to have to do this. And there's also the argument again that most star upside on the board is a good pick. So I thought in terms of just, this is interesting. This was the one that grabbed me because I did not see it coming.
I agree with you, man. Again, because we thought that this was going to be Noah Sengay, because when he was interviewed as to whose film he watched, I'm pretty sure he like listed off like, every Toronto Raptor in the lineage of that team. I think that we were all kind of blown away that it was CMB. I think we were all expecting him to go a little bit later, but I think it is refreshing that, Toronto did go in a different route. Again, that they went for who they identified to be the best player. Clearly, I'm just curious to see, like, Scotty Barnes and Collin Murray-Boyles, how do you best utilize those guys in a two-man action? Because if I'm any sort of defensive coach in the NBA, I'm like, just slip the under, slip the under, like, or it's like in baseball when everyone's like, scoot in, whenever someone's going up to bat. That's what I imagine NBA teams are going to do, because I think you're identifying Scotty Barnes as the best player on your team. And if you're drafting CMB within this draft this high, you're clearly identifying that he's going to be important to your franchise.
Yeah, and I think he should be. And I think that's the other like interesting component of this is I'm wondering, like, just from a team building exercise standpoint, like how much are they going to prioritize him? Like, is this a case where like, hey, we had him, sixth on our team board. That's who is there. We took him, like, it is what it is. Or is he like an organizational priority pretty early on? But yeah, to your point about like just being able to sag off actions that a lot of these teams this team's going to run, like that's only more true. They took the 28th most threes last year. They were 29th in made threes. So this team is not going to keep you honest. And the CMB doesn't help that, but he's also like maybe the highest upside player on this team at this point, is someone who's never really like bought the Scotty Barnes thing very much. Like I think that's probably like, there's a world where this year ends in their discussions about how do we rework the timeline around CMB. Like, I think that's a potential thing on the table. Would I bet the house on it? Probably not, but it's possible.
And then also too, it's like, how do you acquire assets, but then how do you maintain their value as high as they possibly could be? Because if you're doing that, then you're signaling to the rest of the NBA that Scotty Barnes is not as valuable as you once thought that he was. And this is a team that clearly thought the highest of him within the entire NBA, right? So you're signaling defeat in the fact that you can build anything around Scotty Barnes. And now other NBA teams think, okay, well, is he a third option? And if he is a third option, what type of offense do we have to run with him to best utilize his skill? And then he's not really the best necessarily on-ball defender. He's great as a roamer. He's great as a backline defender and just kind of playing that free safety role. How do we utilize him within a defensive scheme with that lowered kind of, sticker price for lack of a better term?
Yeah. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch play out. Let's move over to your pick. You had, who did you? I won't spoil it. Who did you have as your most interesting pick in the top 10?
Yeah, I think Egor Demin, 8th overall to Brooklyn, and it wasn't because of all the subsequent picks that came after him. We're actually going to touch on some more Brooklyn guys as the show progresses. I'm lower on Demin, I think, than a lot of people. And Maxwell, you and I were talking about this as we were watching the draft this year. This was the first time that I didn't care about how I valued players. I was more so rooting for the intel that we got collectively at No Ceiling. So when Egor Demin, I found myself cheering that he was selected at 8th. And then the next day when I'm going back and looking at what happened, I'm like, I don't think I would have done this. I don't think I would have taken Egor. And I mean, I get the fact that he looked good in an open gym setting where he's shooting the basketball and they're going in, even though it's kind of like this weird, kind of side spin on the ball when you watch him shoot with no one closing out on him. I worry with Brooklyn, especially now that we're seeing that they traded for Michael Porter Jr. And by the time the show ends, God only knows who else is going to be dumped on this team for first round picks, right? I just worry about him overall, even though I do get the idea of him. I liken him to that of a Josh Giddey, though, where even though I thought Josh was better coming in, he had kind of like a go-to kind of scoring package, so to speak. Demin doesn't necessarily have that. He's going to be a guy that you're going to run a lot of ball screens for. We were talking about Scotty Barnes earlier and the fact that things are going to slip that defenses are going to slip the screens, any sort of action that he rolls. I imagine that Demin's going to be the same thing because even though he shot a lot, his 3-point volume at BYU was actually pretty encouraging if you're a volume truther, Maxwell. I know you kind of subscribe to that. At some point, though, you got to knock him down, man. And I worry about the live dribble kind of pull-up game that he's going to have. I worry about the toughness that he's going to bring into the NBA. But I get to tip my hat to Brooklyn, though, man, because they clearly see something in him. I guess the high-end version of him is going to be like a Hedo Turkoglu type of a player. And, I mean, if he is Hedo Turkoglu, you draft that 8th overall in almost any draft, right? I mean, he was a very good player for a very long time. I just worry about almost every aspect of his game other than passing the ball.
Yeah, I think that's completely reasonable. I'm with you. I also had Egor quite a bit lower than both consensus in where he was drafted. May I try to sell you on Egor Demin? May I do a sell me this pen on Egor Demin?
Let's do it.
So, do you need a pen? Okay. So, so here's the downside of Egor is pretty obvious. Yeah. So Egor had a 1.8 BPM in 26 games against top 100 opposition. That is very bad. He also had a 40.9 effective field goal percentage and a 46.6 true shooting. I'm just starting off by outlining the reasons why I'm out. So if you're listening to this and you're like, well, why don't these guys like Egor when he's about to say how great he is? He can't put the ball in the basket right now. The opposite of this is, like I said, like you said, I'm a volume truther from 3. He took 10 threes per 100 possessions. There are very few guys that launch that many threes that don't end up being at least adequate shooters. It's the same reason I worry about missing on Jeremiah Fierce is the free throw percentage was so good that it's you don't really see guys go 85% from the line and then not end up making them. If I just run roughly forward size guys that took over 10 threes per 100, we're talking Cam Johnson, Trey Murphy, Jabari Smith Jr., even lower than that. You got your Dorian Finney-Smiths, your Brandon Ingrams, your Keegan Murray's. That is a shooter's number of attempts, even if they didn't go in. The other thing that I would point to is that assist rate of 34.6 over 33 games as a player his size. It is a really rare level of playmaking size. So if you're talking yourself into, okay, well, guys who shoot that many generally figure something out And then on top of that, we've got a guy who's 6'8". He's got this outlier passing feel. And the defense is messy, but I think he's coming to the league much more defensively capable than Josh Giddey. I certainly worry about the physicality. Like you mentioned, the toughness, like that. I think that's going to be a bit of a problem. And I think the real issue for him defensively for me is he's a classic guy who thinks he's Tari Eason, who's not Tari Eason. Like he makes some really bad gambles off the ball, and he does not have the recovery tools to do that. But he still ended up with a 2.5 steal rate and a 1.7 block rate, which for a guy who like probably going to play like the 2-3 initially, those are pretty solid numbers. And I think that feel is there. He knows how to read an opposing offense. I think he can get into passing lanes. I think he can help at the right times. And I feel way better about that side of his game than I did about Josh Giddey's coming into the league. So I think we're hoping that he's got a better chance to shoot. And if he does shoot, the passing and the fact that it'll be a little better than defensively, like that could be a really valuable player. Like I think if you felt a hair better about Josh Giddey defensively and he ended up like making his threes at Nique clip, like the biggest problems about him are suddenly gone. And I think that is why it is so interesting at 8 is I think there's a way it could go really right. I think the yang of that is that like, this is a really gutsy pick. And if you get it wrong, everyone's going to know why you got it wrong. Like this is not going to be Jabari Smith Jr., he ended up like just weirdly being like 6% worse from 3 than we thought he was going to be coming to the league. But hey, he's still a great defender. You know what I mean? Like it's an understandable miss, where with Egor, if he misses, you're going to have egg on your face.
And I think all right, so back to the Josh Giddey thing. How did you feel being someone who's close to Chicago? How did you feel about Josh Giddey the second half of the season where he was?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, as like a Bulls fan, I always get worried about Mickey Mouse March because our players love to like be really good the last 2 months of the season. I thought Josh Giddey was like okay this year. I thought his defense was quite a bit better. And I think with Egor, the hope is that we're starting with a better baseline. Also made more of his threes. I still just like don't quite like how much we're like tailoring the team to Josh Giddey. Just because again, I think there's just like a real ceiling on these like pass first guys that, especially with Giddey, where it's like this feels like it was probably an outlier year from 3. And there are games where the defense is just like so abhorrent. Like there were games early in the year where like he was getting yanked and it was a problem and blah, blah, blah. But I thought he got better. Is he a player that I'm hoping the Bulls don't pay a lot of money to? Yes.
Sure.
But I also think that if you were, I'm trying to think of a good team for this. If you were Orlando and Josh Giddey was like playing in place of Cole Anthony on last year's team, you'd feel pretty good about having Josh Giddey.
Sure. And I would agree with you on that. I think, though, I mean,
Egor Demin possibly better than Cole Anthony. that's pitch.
And that's a pin, and you still pay money for that pin, right? Here's the thing: why I don't have him as high as some other people is that Josh Giddey, we saw the best version of him this year in that second half of the season with Chicago, and even still, we're like, like, is this the type of guy? But that's what we're hoping Egor Demin can become. And it took Josh Giddey leaving a team that was ready to win a championship and go to a team that is okay with making the play-in. You know what I mean? For them to kind of put all their eggs in the Josh Giddey basket. That's what I'm worried about with Demin is like, okay, cool. Like if the high-end version of him is something along the lines, maybe a little bit better of the Josh Giddey than we've seen, I don't think the NBA is telling us that that's incredibly valuable as a player. Like he's going to make money because he's going to be a guy that can make people around him better, but he's not going to make a team better. He's going to elevate some of the skills and qualities of his teammates around him, but he's not going to elevate this team into a winning culture or anything like that. And that's what I'm hesitant with about Egor. He could be a fun player to watch in the NBA for a very long time. I'm just not ready to look at that archetype and say, okay, I've identified my guy. This is the first pick that we have in this rebuild for my team and this franchise moving forward. That's the type of guy that I want to build around.
And I would say the other thing too is even if you were to look at similar guys in this mold where it's guys with the ball in their hands who are genius passers or whatever. And then I'm big on the who on the good teams plays like this thing. And like Tyrese Haliburton, much better scorer, obviously a much greater threat from three. But even if you were to like scale it down and look at a guy like Andrew Nembhard, like Andrew Nembhard just like doesn't need to be spoon fed the same way these guys do. You know what I mean? Like he just like has a better understanding of how to play off ball and a better way to like punish teams off the ball than these two. And that, it's dicey. And I'm very interested to see like how much they try to give him in year one, if they're just straight up like rep it out and let's see where it goes, or if they kind of ease him in. It'll be very interesting to see. Let's take a quick break. We're going to be back with some talk in the 11 to 22 range. A lot of interesting players that kind of slip through the cracks, so stick with us. It's going to be a fun conversation. So the one that jumped out to me in this range was Kasparas Jakucionis falling all the way to 20. I thought this is a really interesting scenario, not just for the board as a whole, but for both Kasparas Jakucionis and the Miami Heat. I think all around this is a really interesting situation. The Heat had kind of been looking to upgrade and get sort of that more traditional guard in their backcourt. They had a really good found money scenario with Davion Mitchell this past season, where he was a guy a lot of teams were kind of like, all right, let's kick him off to Toronto. All right, let's kick him off to Miami. He ended up being really good. Got rewarded too. Just got a new contract in free agency. Terry Rozier, who knows what's going on with that. He might have had a little Malik Beasley action potentially, but it seems like he's in the clear for that. Pelle Larsson, some nice flashes in year one, but probably not a guy that, I think that's more of like if it happens, it happens. You're not looking to draft somebody. You're not worried about drafting over Pelle Larsson at this point. And then after that, the team skews a lot bigger. It's a lot of Andrew Wiggins, Jaime Jaquez, Haywood Highsmith, Jovic, Ayo, like where it's all these bigger guys. Like their backcourt is very thin, and it's a time where backcourt talent is generally like a little easier to acquire, but they could definitely use an infusion of both talent and youth at the guard spot. And Tyler Hero is also just like a guy who it feels like comes up in trade rumors quite a bit. If they look to pivot, that might be a guy that they get off of. So they could use just a younger player in the backcourt, and that's where Kasparas Jakucionis comes in. I thought this was great because I know we both had kind of concerns about Kasparas. I was really high on him throughout the year. His production tailed off, which is why he shot so poorly down the stretch, but he also had a hand injury. I kind of think this was good for him. I know he was projected much higher. I ended up with him around 15.
That's where I had him.
And I think this is a scenario where he gets the benefit of going to a good scenario. He gets the benefit of going to a talented team. A team where he can play guard minutes right away. And he also has a lightened guard role because you already have Tyler Hero and you already have Bam Adebayo, who they were a lot of offense through. You've got Andrew Wiggins, who can do some stuff with the ball. You've got a big man that you can throw lobs to in Kel'el Ware, pick and pop partner potentially in Kel'el Ware if he continues to shoot it. There's going to be all these actions that the Heat run and all these different players who can do things that he can sort of ease his way in and still potentially get minutes pretty early in his NBA career and establish himself. And we've seen with Goran Dragic, who's a guy that he's been compared to a lot in the past. Like they know how to, and even like Tyler Hero to a lesser extent. Hero, I think, is a lot like wigglier and quicker than Kasparas. But it is just a scenario where like they know how to use sort of these taller combo-y guards that we've seen throughout the years. That maybe aren't the most traditional point guards, but they're a guy that you're going to run a lot of your offense through. So I think it's great for Kasparas in that it's going to be a very complimentary context for his initial playing time, his role, a great culture, a coach that knows how to develop this type of guard. But then also like kind of easing the burden of expectations. If he'd been the pick at 8 where Egor went, we might be having a similar conversation about like, oh no, are they going to throw this guy to the Wolves? Like this is a guy that turned it over a lot in college. And I do worry about the turnovers a lot in the pros, certainly. But now it's a lot less of a concern when you're not counting on him to be your number one. You're not counting on him to be the point guard. There's already a ton of playmaking infrastructure in place around him. So I thought this was just like a really interesting scenario, and I like to fit both ways.
I think it's interesting too, because depending on who you talk to, like outside of Dylan Harper, the combination of like Jeremiah Fears, Egor Demin, and Kasparas Jakucionis, like so many people had that order of those organizers in so many different ways. And John Christie in the chat actually wrote, Kasparas is perfect for the Heat, whether the Heat know it or not. Rumor was a promise at Clayton Jr., but this is a much better outcome. I think the only reason the Heat didn't get Walter Clayton Jr. was that Utah traded up to go and get him. I think if Walter Clayton would have been available, based on what we were hearing, is that Walter Clayton Jr. would be a Miami Heat, and Kasparas probably would have fell a little bit further.
And he did the Essengay thing too, where they were like, "Who, if you have dinner with anyone in the world, who would it be?" And he was like, "Eric Spoelstra."
Yeah, throwing us all off his scent. But I like Kasparas to Miami. I think the Jordan's or Goran Dragic stuff is all pretty apt. You mentioned that you had him at 15. I did too, but the thing is like I had him at 15 higher than Demin and Jeremiah Fears, where I thought he was like the center of the Venn diagram between both of those guys, where he's like bigger, not as big as Egor Demin, but a bigger guard. He's not as fast as a Jeremiah Fears, but he's an athletic guy, a good change of pace, good shift of gears type of a player, high assist guy, just like both of those guys, and a little bit turnover prone, like like some of those guys as well. I just think though that I trust the shot between all three of them with Kasparas a lot more. I think that of the three guys that I trust his shot to be the most translatable. And we look too, prior to the arm injury, he was actually shooting really well at Illinois this year. So I think he makes a lot of sense for Miami. I think he fits that style of play. I think that they're going to be able to put him on and off the ball, depending on the rotations down there. I think it's interesting too. And he just feels like a Spoelstra guard based off of, the kind of lineage of guards that we've seen come through Miami.
Yep. Yeah. So I thought that one was interesting. And I thought the fall was interesting too, just because there were guys ahead of him. And we talk about this all the time where teams will want their guy. There'll be teams that get a player in their head and they say, you know what, this is who we want. And it might not matter how the board breaks. It might not matter. The consensus says, oh, well, you have to take Kasparas Jakucionis over Walter Clayton. Because when push came to shove, the Utah Jazz said, you know what, we'd rather have Walter Clayton, which is, again, I think why it's so important. Why it's so important when you're making your boards. If there's a guy you like, rank them high. Like, don't count on them being there low because they're being mocked low. If a team loves a dude, they're going to pick him. And we saw that a few times throughout the night. Stephen, 11 to 20, who is the most interesting pick in your book?
I think this is the right answer, just holistically through the draft. Yang Hansen, we found out that that's how we've been supposed to have been pronouncing his name the entire time. Once he got drafted, we decided that we were going to do him proper. But not only is he interesting, Maxwell, because he's the 16th player selected in this draft, but the fact that there is a trade involved that, look, Portland could have gone the Cedric Coward route, and I think a lot of people would have patted them on the back and said, hey, good job. I had him 10th on my board. I believe you had him right around in that neighborhood as well. No, I had him 9th. I had Cedric 9th, and then I had Nique 10th. I think you had Cedric around that 9th spot too, if I'm not mistaken. But then, Portland did the thing that we were just talking about earlier, is like trading back and getting your guy if you know that he's going to be available. So they picked up, an extra asset. They go to 16th, and then they pick probably the most unique player that they could have gone with. And we've talked about how in the world do we scout young Hansen coming into this, right? And you and I have had conversations. I've had this conversations with other people too. Is like, how do you scout the CBA? Do you go based off of production, or do you go off of traits? And I brought this up to you. Is like the Thompson twins. They played in the OTE. Numbers weren't the greatest. Like, and the style of play wasn't the greatest, but they had outlier traits. We saw LaMelo Ball in the NBL. Numbers weren't the best. You know what was the best? The traits that he had. And if you're evaluating traits and you identify a talent, young Hansen had them. Obviously overwhelming size at his position. He's going to be just as tall in the NBA as he was in the CBA, so that that's going to be true. But the processing is there too, which is, we saw not only did Portland draft him, but days later, they are, cutting and waiving DeAndre Ayton, the former number 1 overall pick within his draft class. So that's a huge vote of confidence, because they have Donovan McClingan on this team. A lot of people who thought last year really could have been the number 1 pick overall in his draft, in last year's draft. You draft young Hansen into the situation now. It's just so interesting because what is Portland going to do? Is he's starting? Like, I think they have shown the smoke screens are out there enough to where it's like, I think they really consider starting him now, and then what does that look like with Denny Avdia, with Scoot Henderson, with Shadon Sharp, with all these other players? Because the best version of young Hansen is going to be as an offensive hub. So is Coach Billups? What is Chauncey Billups going to do with a young Hansen? Like, do we trust that coaching staff to be fully creative with a passing big man? You know, I mean, Billups played with Rasheed Wallace, who in his time was a bit of a unicorn, right?
Mm-hmm.
But completely different from what we're seeing with a young Hansen now. I just think that the whole, what is the coaching staff going to do? What are the rotations going to look like? They got an extra asset while also identifying their guy. They're also going to be the team that's linked to Cedric Coward now too, like forever, for better or worse, right? So there's that aspect of it. And this could be, we talk about like, if you identify your guy, go for him. Like, doesn't matter how high you have him on your board compared to consensus, go and get him. These are also moves, Maxwell, where it's like, you're either going to be set for life or you're going to, and we have a lot of people in Portland that we love, but this is a bold move, Maxwell. Like, these are where front offices are born or broken, in my opinion.
Yeah, bold is the word for it. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think this pick is like an onion, man. You peel back the layers from it, and it gets more and more interesting, to your point. There's the initial layer of, hey, this guy was mocked in like the 40s, and he went at 16. Then there's the layer of, okay, well, this is part of a trade back. So they knew this was their guy. They knew they could get him a little bit later. And now you have to live with, like you said, Cedric Coward, but even anybody that went, 12, Carter Bryant, like anybody else that went in this range is also kind of on your permanent record now to a degree, because that's someone that you could have had at the left and that you chose to move back and not go with. Yeah, I mean, this is a pick that makes you look like a genius or gets you fired. There's not really another way to put it. If this works out, they will be perceived as the smartest guys in the room, because this was not something anybody expected. And if Young hits, you got him and you got an asset for the pleasure of getting your guy and having it pay off. Then you get into the, well, wait a minute, what does that look like with this team layer? Which I think you laid out, which is interesting, which I cannot get over the Donovan Clingan aspect of this. I adore Donovan Clingan. I loved the Donovan Clingan pick last year. I think Donovan Clingan, this is I like a take, but I heard somebody else say it, so I feel comfortable enough voicing it. I think there's an argument to be made that Donovan Clingan was like actually the best rookie in the NBA last year. Like, I think if you look at the overall like rebounding per minute, like just overall impact on off, how good Portland was down the stretch, like I thought he was incredibly impactful towards winning for the Trailblazers. I don't know that you can ever play them together.
Right.
And that normally wouldn't be the biggest deal when it's like, oh yeah, you took a center at 16. Well, the one that you took really high last year is probably the bigger priority. You don't take Hansen Yang that high if you don't think he's that dude. You took him there because you think he's that dude. So I'm assuming, I guess they think one of them will shoot at some point, or that because of the passing, maybe that like they can go to the top of the key hubs. Like,
I think Yang's going to shoot.
I think he will too, but like how soon? I
would say question. Year 2. I feel pretty comfortable with saying year 2. I think the shot's there. Like, we saw it in the combine. Like, the motion looks good. Like, I'm not Brooke Lopez good or anything that, or Cat, but looks good enough to be safety dangerous.
Valve. Yeah, Olenek, I'm open, kind of shooter.
Yeah.
I think like that end of it is fascinating. I also kind of like, I see the lineups that they can play with him when we talk about the defensive concerns, where it's like, you've got Denny Avdia, you've got Matisse Thybulle, you've got Tumani Kamara, you've got Drew Holiday, you've got Delano Banton, even, who's just like a big, long dude, Jeremy Grant. Like, they have the bodies where this could work. I think my biggest thing is still just like, I don't know what you do with him and Donovan Clingan together. And I also don't know how the Shaedon Sharpe, Scoot Henderson, Hansen Yang lineups function defensively at all. Like, those are the two where I'm just like, hold the phones for a minute here. But again, I am still a believer that like if you're picking at 16, you don't want to trip yourself too much about like, well, how does he fit right now with my team? Guys change teams all the time, like whatever. I just think it's interesting. I think it's very, very interesting. And like the shooting thing is like another thing where like Scoot Henderson's been like an iffy shooter. Like, Donovan Clingan's not shooting yet. Danny Avdia can be up and down. Tumani Kamara had a good year, but like was not exactly a shooter coming into the league. Like, not a high degree of difficulty guy. Like, the more you think about it, the more fascinating it is. I really hope this works out because I'm fascinated to see what it would look like. And I think that's a lot more fun than just like, oh man, like it didn't pan out. Like, I just think that's more interesting. But yeah, to your point, I think far and away the most interesting pick, honestly, the entire draft, in my opinion.
And if I could add just real quick, Maxwell, everyone would have laughed at Denver if they took Nikola Jokic in the first round.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, again, you got to get lucky, and a lot of things got to hit right. But everyone always I mean, Kristaps Porzingis got booed when he got drafted. Where he got drafted.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
the question though is it that, or is it a Ronaldo Balkman situation where the Knicks made that pick of Ronaldo Balkman, everybody booed, and Ronaldo Balkman wasn't very good. Like there's
Papagiannis,
Papagiannis, it happens. So I'm intrigued to see which way it ends up breaking. Let's get into our 21 to 30 interesting picks. I went with Danny Wolf to Brooklyn. This is a pretty boring explanation. Obviously, everyone knows I like Danny Wolf a lot. He was a guy I was high on. I just want to see him and Daron Sharp play together. I think that's it. Like, it's literally just as simple as like, you've got one of the best passing, like bruising, rebounding bigs in the league. And now you have another version of that who's a little taller, but can maybe shoot a little bit. And then like Sharp is more like competent being a defensive anchor, deterring guys. He gets a lot more steals than Danny Wolf will ever get. He's not getting steals like that. But I just think that pairing in particular is interesting. And I also think we talked about the Brooklyn stuff a little bit earlier, so we can get into that now. Like, this is a team that drafted 5 dudes in the first round.
Yes. I'm cool with that.
Okay, I am too. I don't hate the idea totally. I would have preferred to consolidate just because I don't know like how many guys.
Well, the roster.
I don't know how many guys you can incubate simultaneously and have success. I think would be my concern. I also kind of like it for Danny Wolf because I think Danny Wolf is like the guy I'd feel most comfortable playing an NBA game tomorrow out of any of the guys that they picked.
Yes. I'm with that.
So I like that for him. Is it like, of the guys that they drafted, I think he's the one that you can just kind of throw out on the court. I thought he was really good value at 27. And I just think from like a tempo standpoint too, like I mentioned Sharp, but we've got, him in there now. Ben Seraph is the guy that can get out and run. Egor is going to want to get out and run. I think there's like a really fun up-tempo level of possibilities here. Traore is going to want to run, like Drake Powell, like even like the Keon Johnson kind of guys that are just sort of like lingering around this roster. Noah Clowney, like this is a fun, like this team. Look, they're not going to be good. I'm not saying
they were going to suck,
but I'm saying on the right night when the shots are going in, there's going to be nights where this Brooklyn Nets team is very fun to watch. Are there also going to be games where they have a lot of possessions and it's a fast-paced game, and because Egor and Danny Wolf each have 7 turnovers, they end up losing by 40 points? Like, yeah, that's going to happen too. But I was just absolutely fascinated by this pick and like what it looks like and the kind of lineups that they might be rolling out as a result of it.
They're going to be fun when they win, especially like if you're going to a Brooklyn Nets game, Albert Gim, I'm sure if you're listening, I understand what your thought process is right now. But for Brooklyn Nets fans, that are in the building watching them play, when they win, it's going to be a fun experience just because they're going to be the most excited team out of any team winning in the NBA. I think too, though, that like the 5 picks thing is probably a little overblown. Like their roster was terrible last year. And like, is 5 really that much more than 4? Like we've seen teams with 4 picks like stay in, but for some reason we're like, no, like no more than 4. 5 is ridiculous.
I think what I'm most interested in is like the overlap as far as like, if you're drafting Egor at 8, you probably think he's an
that's the problem.
Guy. Traore, Seraph, like is kind of, I think Seraph is like going to be better second side than people think because like the shot looks funny, but it went in. Like I kind of buy the second side Seraph idea. But yeah, all those guys were point guards for their team last year, and Danny Wolf was a point guard for his team last year.
Yeah,
what did he do for Drake Powell though, who played with 4 point guards last year?
And that's the thing is like, it's not that they got 5 guys, but it's the 5 guys that they got for me is the problem, where Danny Wolf is a 7-foot point guard. He led his team in pick and roll ball handling possessions last year at Michigan, which is silly to even still think about and like go back and look at. So that's the problem that I have. But the Danny Wolf fall was interesting to me. I think that for the most part, I might have been like the lowest one at no ceilings on Danny Wolf. I had him like 17th or 18th on my board. And I was even like, geez, like somebody take Danny. He's too talented. And I do like his fit with Brooklyn. I think that he, like you mentioned, that combination was sharp, but now also Michael Porter Jr. Like that's going to be a fun, like a funky front court where they can run like some like 2-man actions with any one of those guys. And you're gonna be like, man, this is fun to watch, you know? So, and I think that he's going to make the point guard's jobs a lot easier because he can run a pick and roll, but then he can short roll spray it out to somebody else in the corner. They're probably going to miss, but he can spray it out there to him in the corner at least. So that's a fun pickup for them. I really like that for Brooklyn. And I'm going to be excited to see Danny, who I think I would have been more excited if he lasted like a couple more picks. Like watching him in Boston would have been so much more fun in my opinion, but I was happy for him that the fall stopped at some point, you know?
Yep. And then who do you got in the 21 to 11 range here?
Yeah. The Sacramento Kings did such good work, I would say, throughout the draft. And when they picked Nique Clifford at 24, I was like, this is just smart basketball team decision making right here. I was super high on Nique Clifford. I had him 10th on my board. I get that he's an upperclassman, but we touched on like Utah traded up for an upperclassman and like inside the top 20. So I would be curious to know. I wish I could be a fly on a million walls in the NBA and just be like, how come 23 teams were like, no, we're good? You know what I mean? Because he's so good. And like, I get the shot concept. You and I have beaten this dead horse over and over. Like they're over 37% over 2 seasons. Like at some point you just got to say like, okay, like the guy could shoot. He's also shown that he can run an offense as well. He's also shown that he's an incredible defender and rebounder. So like, I don't know what else you can do. I just thought that this was a smart move for Sacramento, who they're in the news right now for, wanting to trade Devin Carter already for some crazy reason, as well as I think Malik Monk was another name. So if they're going to clear it out and let Nique be a vital member, I know that they got Keon Ellis too, so that could be a fun 2-guard rotation. I'm just interested to see what Sacramento does because they feel like one of these teams is like stuck in just like the middle of the pack in the Western purgatory, like even I would say like the bottom third of the NBA now with the way that the West is looking. But I was excited just to see Nique get picked up. Probably not my favorite place that he could have gone, but I think it was a smart move for Sacramento just to go and get their guy.
Yeah, I think he's both interesting in terms of like where the team is now, where like if they have to run it back and it's Levine and DeRozan and Sabonis and these guys that like need guys who know how to play off the ball, and he can do that. And they need like a little defensive infusion if they want to move the ball a lot. He's good in that sort of a system. If they blow it up, I think he's malleable enough to like fit in wherever. And I thought Jake LaRavia was really good for them down the stretch last year. He's going to LA. They couldn't like financially with some of those weird things where it's like, I don't think they could offer as much as LA did because of like collective bargaining stuff. So he's gone, but Nique is like kind of he's not as big as LaRavia, but it's like a similar idea of like, this guy just really knows how to fill in the gaps. He really knows how to play. He's going to move the ball. He's going to rebound. He's going to push the tempo, and he's just going to make everything a little bit easier for everybody else. And I think Nique is like a similar idea, even though he's like further down the positional spectrum. And I think all in all, like, I get it now. I get it later. I get it regardless of wherever this thing's potentially headed. So I agree with you. I thought it was just like a good piece of business in the second round for a team that needs to be conducting good pieces of business. Let's take a quick break and we will get into our second round and undrafted guys. We will be right back. All right. So in the 31 to 45 range, I want to talk about Ryan Kalkbrenner to Charlotte. So I think Charlotte got a lot of praise for this draft. I think I don't like quite get it as much because like I feel like Sion James was like a good kind of pick for the range that he was picked in. The con pick was fantastic. I would have done the same thing. I think the McNeely one is like where it loses me a little bit just because I was like lower on McNeely. And I'm like, he's fine at 29. But people are like, oh, they got Liam McNeely at 29. And like, I've got a bit of a disconnect there. I think Liam's going to be fine. I think Liam will like be around the NBA for a long time. But I wasn't like blown away by it. I do love the Kalkbrenner selection though, because it's like it's sort of like just piecemeal, like taking apart their center minutes from last year, surely but slowly. First piece of that was the Nick Richards trade around the trade deadline. Now they're like officially moving on from Mark Williams, which I think was something you kind of had to do after just how weird it was going to be, given that you tried to trade him and that didn't happen. Moussa Diabate like really quietly had a very strong closing stretch to this last season where he was just like all over the glass and like playing good energy big minutes. And I'm not saying that like Moussa Diabate is like all of a sudden one of the best backup bigs in the league or anything, but he looks like a real player. And now you finish rebuilding this big man rotation by getting Ryan Kalkbrenner, who I think like is going to play and be good immediately. And this is why Ryan Kalkbrenner was the guy who should have gone in the first round. And I think my biggest disconnect from the picks in this draft was I feel like we just got done watching the playoffs where it was very physical. The feel bar is the highest it's ever been. The skill bar is the highest it's ever been. And we saw a bunch of guys get drafted that are really young, really skinny, and like were not particularly productive in whatever league they just played in that was not as good as the NBA. And I feel like just mentally, I had a really hard time reconciling that going into day two. And a guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner just sitting on the board is a prime example of, I think, a team saying, let's not get cute with it. Let's take the guy that we know is an NBA center. And this is, I'd be stunned. I'm not a big, like, this is going to happen guy with picks. Like, I'm very open to, like, last year we did a best and worst fits. I said AJ Mitchell was one of the worst fits. I've been wrong a million times. All right. I just, like, I don't see a world where this return on, like, pick 34 value on Ryan Kalkbrenner does not end up being like a great value play. I just can't imagine it. I think he's going to come in, know how to anchor a defense, dunk the ball, do the simple stuff. I really want him to get stronger. I don't like that he doesn't rebound that well. It's always bothered me with him.
Yep.
But I think he's just a clear NBA rotation player. And when you get like an obvious NBA guy in the second round, I think that's a huge win.
Yeah, and if you don't trust Maxwell and I for the whole AJ Mitchell thing, trust us with big men like Quentin Post. Come on,
yeah,
like
we nailed Quentin Post. That's true.
Come on. I mean, late second round guy playing in the playoffs. I mean, so you could trust us with our big men takes. And Maxwell, you and I were like, clearly Kalkbrenner is like, there's like a break in tier around like that 18, 19, potentially 20 mark. Anywhere after that, we were like, sure, you could talk us into Ryan Kalkbrenner, depending on the team that's being selecting. And like you said, the way that you said it was good piece of biz. Like taking Kalkbrenner at 34 is just the perfect piece of biz. And I also was a little bit lower on Liam McNeely. I believe I had him 28th on my board. I had Elijah Martin over him. But I do think that Charlotte did a really good job like establishing professional basketball acumen for the first time in a long time, if ever, within their drafting careers, because they don't develop guys. Like they don't develop these hypothetical players, like these high ceiling, disastrous floor players. They just don't do well with that type of a player. And it's finally so refreshing to see them deviate from that and just say, okay, Con Knipple, not saying he doesn't have a high ceiling, but we feel pretty daggum secure about his floor and what he's going to be in the NBA. You could probably say the same thing about Liam McNeely, especially where they drafted him. Like, hey, look, this guy in high school last year before he took on this weird role at UConn, he shot over 46% from threes. We feel pretty secure about that. Sion James, sure, in-state guy, played at Duke, built-in chemistry with Con Knipple. We feel really good about his frame, physicality. We were talking about, what do the playoffs tell us? You got to be physical. We know that Sion's going to be able to do that. He expanded his range to deep. He can defend. He can pass a little bit. We feel pretty good about that. And then Ryan Kalkbrenner, the fact that he's been a defensive player of the year as long as Kaman Malawach has been playing basketball his entire life, like that's pretty daggum securing. And then the fact that he's willing to experiment, put the ball on the deck and make good passes as well this year. Now we know that he can at least extend the play to some degree. I think that this was a fantastic pick for Charlotte.
Yeah. I thought it was just good, simple, smart drafting in the second round.
Eat your vegetables.
Yes. Yeah. And like we talk about this all the time. Like it's fun to swing big in the second round, but historically, if you look at the guys who pan out in the second round, even like Jalen Brunson's, it's guys who are thought of as boring. And then like even like a Mitchell Robinson, if we want to go a little bit more like who's a normal like guy that can hit in the second round, it's generally the guy that you think is a little safe and a little boring that ends up being the one that actually pans out. Stephen, who was your pick in this range?
Maxwell, you and I have been saying for a long time that this is a Brooks Barnhizer household. I gotta go Brooks, man. OKC taking a shot on our guy when you and I were thinking like, man, we love Brooks. Like, where does he go in a second round? Maybe it's the tail end. The fact that Oklahoma City said, you know what? We have guys, we want vibes and high character and effort and high motor. And like, that's what Brooks Barnhizer gets you. I mean, this dude will play without his front teeth and go out there and still try to bite kneecaps off, Detroit or Detroit Lions style. I just think that it's such an interesting pick, right? Because we know that they value this whole dribble pass shoot thing. And there were a couple of players that they could have gone that personified that a little bit more than Brooks Barnhizer, because he's not a great shooter. He's more of a scorer, but he is a dribble pass guy, and he's a hard-nosed defender. The fact that they went character based, with the 44th pick, they could have even traded off of this pick, I feel like, in the second round too. But the fact that they wanted to invest in Brooks, they wanted to put him in the blue. I think that that's where he's going to get a lot of minutes to kind of help establish and build up their G League program a little bit more. I just think that it's interesting, right? Yeah. Not the best pick within the second round, but the fact that Oklahoma City kept their second round pick, that in the middle of the second round, with all of who they still had available to them at 44, a lot of good talent still out there. The fact that they identified Brooks Barnhizer as a guy that they just like, you fit what we want, like in terms of rotation dudes that just bring the right attitude, like the lunch pail type of player. I just thought that this was just such a cool moment because you and I both love Brooks Barnhizer.
For sure. It's been really cool to watch him develop locally, get to see him play in person, and then see him get his name called on draft night. Jacob Myers, also known as League Him, does some great work on the draft. Says, love Brooks landing in the OKC developmental system. I think that's the other thing to keep in mind, right? Like we've talked about Brooks Barnhizer a lot. We're both believers in like high usage guys scaling down into a role that know how to play a role already, just know how to play basketball. That's Brooks Barnhizer. Can really put it on the deck, has that like, I always say like the Jaime Jaquez herky jerky game. Like if you watched Jaime at UCLA, that's kind of how Brooks goes about his business. Super savvy passer, awesome defensive rebounder, so disruptive on defense. Even in that high usage role, you get a 3.8 block rate and 3.7 steal rate. Like it is very rare to see a guy have to take on such a big offensive burden and still play with that like attention to detail on defense, still be engaged, still be active and eager to help, even when you're not needed to do that necessarily. Like Brooks did all that. The question is just, is he going to shoot? He'd had like a nice stair step improvement to his 3-point percentage prior to this year. He went from 18.2% to 31% to 34.8%. And then this year went down to 26.6%. He played through a bunch of injuries. There was one point in the year where like all of his threes had been guarded. He'd had like 6 unguarded catch and shoot threes. And that was it at one point. Because again, the role was so big and like teams would want to pressure him because they don't want him to get dribble penetration, like all this stuff. Like Jacob points out, the OKC developmental system is one of the G League systems in the league that you can point to that has consistently led to guys improving and getting better, even if it's, for a different team later on, and then they come back full circle. This is a very connected top-down organization from what I understand, where like everything's in the same building. There's a lot more cohesiveness than with a lot of other G League systems. Look, in the second round, like you got to bet on something. I like the idea of betting on the guy who does everything but shoot. Put him in a developmental system that you've cultivated, that you trust, and then send him to the G League, where we always say, what's the G League good for? Taking a ton of threes. Like, I think it's great. I think it's a really smart pick. I think there's a chance it returns value. If not, you've got 7,000 other picks, and it's fine.
Yeah, it's a perfect opportunity just to take the flyer on the person. And shout out to Jacob and everybody else for tuning in the middle of the free agency frenzy. You're hanging out. You guys are real draft sickos out there.
Yep. Going to 46 to the 59 range. I'm going to go with Taleon Peter to Indiana because
me.
This was the big blindside pick of the draft.
Yes.
So Taleon Peter is a guy that I saw pop up. I hope I'm not getting this wrong. A lot of like really good analytics people were doing these cool like interactive like projective draft models and draft boards. And Taleon Peter, I want to say, was on the Data Baller one. And the reason for that is like not unsound. Taleon Peter had a 9.0 BPM this past year, which like not something you normally see at the mid-major level.
And who he played for? To quote Charles Barkley,
Liberty. Yeah,
there we go.
75.6% on twos and 45.3% from three on 12.8 attempts per 100 possessions, which
he wasn't even the starter either for his team either.
He came off the bench. So he had a 72.4 true shooting percentage. Assist rate is low for a guy his size. He rebounded well. He's got like kind of a bulky frame. I think he weighs around like 205, 206. Not like the most active defender, again, particularly because like we're talking about a guy that's playing in like what league is Liberty even in? It's Conference USA. Like it's not
I
like
was about
great
to say,
mid-major like league. It's more middle of the pack. But
like if you're 6'8" or 6'7", you're spending times in his zone defense as a center, you know?
Yeah. Well, like that's like the guy that we've talked about on Liberty before on this podcast is Owen Aquino, who's like an interesting big man who can like handle the ball a little bit and is like probably 6'7". Like that's what we're dealing with. So the bet here, which I think is interesting, is like, can we take a guy who doesn't have negative feel and can really shoot and finish above the rim? Because he had like 30 dunks or something too. Like he has real, like he can get to the basket without a seam. Can we take this guy who knows how to feast off of other players and put him in a system where we've got a lot of good basketball players? We're the Indiana Pacers. We just went to the finals, and see if he can replicate any of that. There have been worse picks made in the second round. I think it's a very interesting bet. Where I would say I'm leery is that Taleon Peter's priors, like even at like the lower levels, don't necessarily align with him being that great of a shooter. And this was also a team where he was really able to feast off the work of others. We always talk about like, you know, generally it's the guy who is the best seed on their college team. Taleon Peter, he was the leading scorer at Liberty, but he was also like feasting off of Zach Cleveland, who's like this jumbo, like mid-major Ben Simmons-y kind of guy.
I kind of liked him.
Zach Cleveland's kind of nice.
Yeah, I kind of liked him.
So there's him.
As nice as a sicko prospect could be, you know?
Yeah. You got Owen Aquino, who you mentioned, who's like sort of like this handling and passing big. There's like Caden Matheny, who's another guard, Colin Porter, who's a guard. Like they have all these plus passers on this team. So it is like sort of easy to be like a pick your spots guy. I'm not saying it's easy to shoot like 72% from two and 45% from three. I'm not saying that, but I am saying I do have some skepticism about like, I don't know, like if you put Walter Clayton on this team, you know what I mean? Like what do those numbers look like? I think they look pretty darn good. So I'm skeptical, but it's the most interesting. It is I don't want to say like a pure like analytics bet, because the kid's a good athlete. Like he's 6'4" and strong, and he can move. So it's not like a pure spreadsheet bet, but I think it's a very fascinating, like in this college super team era, how much does usage matter really? Like, can we find a guy who is so elite at picking his spots that is actually the elite trait that carries over to the NBA? Very interesting to me.
It is incredibly interesting. I think in the second round, like in terms of interesting as just analyzing a prospect, I think him and Salu Niang were the two most interesting players that you could have gone with in the second round. And I'll just mention Niang as an honorable mention. We won't talk about him much more for the rest of the night. But Peter is just so interesting because it's like, mentioned usage. We also touched on the fact that he wasn't even a starter on his own team, and somehow has found his way to being drafted in the 2025 NBA draft by a team that was in the NBA finals. You know, that like this is a Disney movie, you know, like if he steps on an NBA court, like Disney could legit make a movie about this guy, like just lacing his sneakers in the NBA and like telling a backstory to his grandchildren or something, right? Like it's the analytical portion of it this is like calculator rat, you know, to quote our friends over at Ball. Like this is calculator rat, like, you know, Nirvana, in so many ways. I hope he plays. I'm rooting for him. I want him to play in the NBA just to kind of like defy so many odds that had to have happened for him to even be drafted.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see even just like what his like G League stats look like if he's like not on the main team. Your pick was I don't know. I gotta hold myself back from spoiling.
It's okay.
Who's your pick in this range?
Do you want to announce it, Maxwell?
You can do it.
Okay. Will Richard, 56 to the Golden State Warriors. I'll remind you that the last time that the Golden State Warriors drafted this late in the second round, it was Quentin Post that they selected. I like Will Richard. Like I like him. I had him like upper 40s, lower 30 range on my board. I think that there's a world where this guy is the Danny Green of this draft class because he is kind of an undersized too, but spaces the floor really well, takes up tough defensive assignments with a smile on his face, competes just like in every aspect of the game. And going to Golden State where, listen, like we don't know what the health of any of these guys are going to look like because they're all geriatric. Like this is an old team in Golden State. I would not be surprised if we see Will Richard play meaningful minutes at some point during the season. He shoots well, so he's going to fit that Golden State Warriors team. He's a winner. He's national champion. I think Steve Kerr really values like that type of stuff when you're bringing in a player into your organization. I think Maxwell, I legit think that this dude is going to play in the NBA. I think he's kind of like Keon Ellis in a sense where sure, he's older. He's going to be a guy that's just like very boring, another eat your vegetables type of pick, 3-and-D. What else can he do? Not much. All right. We don't need him to do much else. Like just go out there and do those two things and do it at a high level. Dude, please tell me, like, am I too crazy to think that Will Richard could legit play this year in Golden State?
Well, Golden State plays like 15 guys every game. So
true.
So he might like he probably will at some point. Like he'll probably be out on the floor. So I've had a hard time with Will Richard because of the usage thing we've talked about a lot, where like he is just like the fifth best guy on his college team at times. And I think guys like him and Sion James are like the type of players I'm most interested to see. Like what happens with these guys this year, where it's like you were really good at your college role, and generally that meant you don't succeed in the NBA. But now, like being the best player on a college team now is different than being like the fifth best player on a college team 5 years ago. Like it's not the same anymore because now these schools just get overrun with talent because of the transfer portal. Like if this was a decade ago, Will Richard would be in year 4 of, putting up 25 a game at Belmont.
Yeah.
And then the perception of him looks a lot different. So I am fascinated to see what guys like him, what guys like Sion James do, who we love them as role guys. And like, we understood like, hey, there's a toughness, there's a savvy, there's a selflessness, there's an efficiency, like now what? And like, I'm still a little skeptical of it, but it's probably one of the players I'm most worried about being wrong about, because I feel like I've talked to too many people that are just in on the Will Richard thing. And like Elijah Martin's another one and Sion James is the other, where it's like, I don't totally get it, but I can see if I'm wrong, why I'm wrong. And it could potentially be the area where I adjust my draft philosophy the most if those 3 dudes end up looking awesome.
And I think too, like what better scheme on both ends of the floor than Golden State could you see a Will Richard translating to just like perfectly, where he played off of, so many playmakers out of the backcourt. He played out of, having the defensive, tenacity out of the front court. He's played along so many just winning style players and never felt like he was inferior to any of them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, and I think that matters. I think the mentality that he has, where even though he's around like that 6'4", 6'5" size, he guarded up in the SEC so often and took on like really legit tough assignments. Like I legit think that he could be like the Danny Green, who was also, if I'm not mistaken, a 2nd round pick, within his draft class coming out of UNC. Like I've said it a couple times, and I'm also feel like I could be underrating him too, just because of like the comparisons to Danny Green that I just keep throwing his way. But I can't help but see like a Danny Green type future for Will Richard, especially going to a winning team right off the jump. Like going to Golden State, I think is going to be like, a jump start into him being a really good player in the NBA.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think it's a fascinating fit. For our undrafted free agents, I'm going to go with Brice Williams from Nebraska, who, if I'm not mistaken, might only be on a summer league deal.
I know that you wrote undisclosed on your article.
Yeah.
I couldn't find anything either. And I won't lie, like I didn't like scour the internet to try to find the contract. But
Rookie Scale has it as a summer league, which if that's it, I would call from another team and be like, buddy, you're not playing summer league there. You're playing for us on a 2-way. Like that is malpractice.
There's 3 2-ways per team now, right? Yeah, like why not?
Very few 2-ways handed out this year, which I think is like part of the depth of the class issue rearing its head. But Brice Williams to me is like a guy who should absolutely be on one. Averaged 20 a game at Nebraska this year. He's 6'7". He's got long arms. I think
too.
Like big body. And I know that he plays a little bit slow, but I kind of don't think that matters too much because I think he's an awesome shooter. Like 38.5% over the course of his college career. And you go back and watch him at Charlotte, he was like a movement shooter there. Like they would run him off screens all the time. Like I think there are really easy ways for him to pare this thing back. Good rebounder, really smart player, knows how to make decisions on defense. I think when the role is a little bit better offensively, he can kind of show a little bit more effort defensively. But even then, he knows where to go. He knows how to use his length. He can really get up on the ball. When it's like late in the clock and he knows he needs to play with a little bit more intensity at the point of attack, I think he does a good job of doing it in those circumstances. I just, man, like 6'7" dudes that score 20 a game and like know how to play basketball and can shoot the three. Like in this class, that's a guy that shouldn't be going undrafted, let alone
in
like
this economy
there on a potential summer league deal. Like I'm blown away. Hunter Dickinson got a 2-way. Got a 2-way, and Brice Williams is showing up to summer league, bringing his resume with him. I hope that's not the case. I hope he's on a 2-way or at least in Exhibit 10. But yeah, malpractice if that's the case. I think Brice Williams is awesome, and I think he's like one of the guys that I would feel most confident in, like figuring out something. Even if he ends up being like more of a roster fodder guy, you could do worse in terms of roster fodder guys than like a 6'7" guy who is really smart and can shoot.
Yeah, I've waxed and waned on exactly where I had him on my board. I don't feel good about it, but I'm pretty sure he was outside my top 60. Just another dude where it makes a lot of sense, like why he could be successful. At some point, you just kind of have to draw a line in your ranking. And I think he was just on the opposite end of it. But I liked him a lot throughout the year. I thought really highly of him. I don't think that he like improved in a lot of areas. I think that he's just been consistently him for the past couple of seasons, which is why he kind of landed where he did. But to your point, man, like also like Hunter Dickinson getting a 2-way, that's because the Pelicans are like, because of who's running the team now, they're attracted to big men. Like they brought in Kevon Looney too, out of free agency.
I forgot that they brought in Kevon Looney too. Yeah.
I don't know how people can be on multiple teams and do the same things. And yeah, I'll move on. But yeah, I like Brice. My undrafted dude, Maxwell, was Ryan Nembhard. Why I think he's interesting is because I've heard coming in that he had a floor in the second round, but what makes it interesting is that the whole political aspect of being a second round guy, we saw that he ended up going to Dallas, and I think that that's good business. I think that negotiating your way probably out of a spot that where you might not have like the most clear-cut path, especially as a second round guy, to getting any sort of minutes. I think going to Dallas, where they did just recently sign, D'Angelo Russell, I wouldn't worry about that being like him being a fixture long term. I think that is more just like we got to bring in a backup quarterback essentially because we only have one quarterback on a roster right now. I think Ryan Nembhard being a guy who I'm just going to assume negotiated his way out of the second round based off of all the information that we had been hearing. I think that he negotiated his way out of the second round to go to a team that's talented, has height around him to hide him defensively because he just doesn't have the frame, sub 6 foot, sub 180 pounds. You got to have a very special sort of defensive, infrastructure around you in order to succeed and be your most high-end outcome. I think that Ryan Nembhard negotiated his way to be at the perfect team in the NBA by going to Dallas, because now he can pass open all of these guys. He showed that he can shoot on about moderate volume. I love the negotiation to find his way to Dallas.
Yeah, I think it's a really good fit. I'm like skeptical of Nembhard. Like, I think he's a really smart player. Again, just like one of these guys where it's like, I don't know how you score it. I think he's gonna have a really hard time with physicality. I think he's gonna have a hard time with defense. Like, I think he definitely has a cap on him that a lot of like other guys don't have, which is why I ranked him lower on my board. But I think Dallas is like one of those situations where, like, in the regular season, like, you might just get minutes for them because they are short on guards and kind of like talent in general, especially while Kyrie's recovering. And I think he's going to look good in those spot minutes when he gets them. Like, I think when they come his way, he's going to be able to go into a game and make decisions at a pro level, if nothing else. So from that standpoint, I think it's like one of the better pickups. And I also just think the Dallas like summer league roster in general looks really good. Like, I feel like Dallas is one of the teams that did the best job of handling the draft and the fallout from it in terms of like everything makes sense. I like the bets that they're taking. I just think they know what they're doing right now, which is a relief after the Luka trade. If you were worried about this front office like being out of their depths, it seems like, okay, maybe that was a weird one. It was a weird one, but
you're seeing the vision.
Yeah, hey, defense wins championships, and Obina and Ochile Keelan might lead them to a summer league championship. When you got him,
he's so fun.
Like, I love him. Moneyball Ryan Dunn is the guy that you should be on a two-way.
For sure.
So yeah, very, very fun draft. Stephen, wrapping it up. Anything coming down the pipe for you?
Yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit sentimental for a second after I plug this, but I have a piece coming out on Wednesday projecting Chaz Lanier, who's a guy that I've interviewed 2 times throughout his college career. He ended up going to Detroit. A piece is called Drafter Math, where I'm projecting him as a Detroit Piston. I actually submitted this article before the Mikal Beasley stuff came out, with him potentially, like, his future just with the team kind of being in flux. But I plug how Chaz can kind of like fill that role or fit that mold to a certain extent. And then I was on the Chase Down podcast the other day where I was talking to, Justin there about the Cleveland guys. And I was on the PHNX podcast where I was talking to Eric over there about the Suns guys. If you want to hear me talk about any of those prospects, those are live. Outside of that, though, man, like, Maxwell, this is the last episode of Draft Sickos for this draft cycle, and we have a big summer. We have a big summer ahead of us, man. And sure. I have a couple prospects that I've been talking to behind the scenes that I'm really excited about, kind of doing some like forecasting and projection pieces on. But we have obviously we don't want to share a whole lot of details, but man, like, there's some pretty dope things potentially coming down the line for not just us, but the No Ceilings family at large. So just want to say thank you to everybody who has been tuning in and following all of our work, subscribing to the YouTube, subscribing to the Substack and all of those things, because it's helped us just like grow as scouts and stuff like that and like fueled our fire. But just the kind of levels of notoriety and recognition that we're getting because of our incredible fan base, like, it's literally all because of y'all. We could talk into a microphone and we could type on a keyboard all we want, but if we don't have the audience that we have, in the No Ceilings universe, then it's all just kind of for nothing. So sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for listening, liking, sharing, subscribing, rating, reviewing to all of our platforms. It has done a lot of awesome things for us. So thank you all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like, this is the best year I've had doing stuff in basketball. I'm gonna keep it close to the vest person, so I won't gush on about everything, but everything Stephen said is true. We've gotten to do a lot of really cool things that were a result of the support that we get from our listener base, from our readership, from the people that support our work. And like, genuinely, we could not do this without you. I know it's like something people say, oh, we're gonna do this without you, but like, if we didn't have people listening, if we didn't have people watching, we wouldn't have the opportunities we have to work on the kind of projects that we were able to work on, or have access to the things that we need to do what we do. Yeah, it could not happen without the people that consume this content. And there's, a reason that there's not a lot of people that want to do podcasts where they talk about guys that are, ranked around 100th on their board. And it's because it's hard work and it's not the most glamorous thing in the world. And we love that there are people that want to get down and dirty with us and talk about it. It really does mean the world to us. We got a lot coming this summer. Stick with us. Follow Stephen at Stephen G Hoops. Follow me at Boundboards. Most importantly, follow No Ceilings at No Ceilings NBA. We've got a lot of fun stuff. U19s are going on. There's going to be Summer League. There's going to be all sorts of content. Steven's working on stuff. I'm working on stuff.
I'm going to the JUCO All-Star Tournament like in July, which I'm so excited that I get to attend that, you know, and the folks there are so nice. Like they've promoted that I'm going to be in attendance.
Yeah.
And I'm like, me? Like you're going to promote that? But
they should. There's JUCO dudes there's a JUCO guy in No Stone Unturned that I'm covering this summer. Like there's always talent at the JUCO level.
I'm excited to check it out, man. Like a lot of really talent. Like I looked at some of the names, like I'm pumped that I get to be in attendance, and of course I'm going to have something come out over the summer recapping that event, and like some people to keep your eye on for all the sickos out there.
For sure. So thank you all for tuning in. We will be back. We'll be around. We're never going anywhere. So reach out, make sure you're following along with us. We will.
It's not goodbye, it's see you later.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much for your support around the draft cycle. We'll talk to you soon.
Much love, y'all.